Hello, I'm Uzo, and welcome to Module 4 of your BTEC Level 1 Health and Safety in a Construction Environment course. Module 4 is about the risks to health within a construction environment. So, by the end of this session, you should be able to list the general health risks within a construction environment, describe the substances hazardous to health and their handling precautions. You'll be able to examine the consequences of alcohol and drug use in the workplace, describe safe storage of chemicals and flammable material, look at personal hygiene in a construction environment, and look at dealing with asbestos. And one thing I have to say here is, as well as safety, we also need to consider the health of people in the workplace. So, threats to health mainly arise from poor hygiene and welfare facilities. So, things like nowhere to wash your hands, dirty or inadequate toilets, also incorrect handling and use of chemicals. So, all chemicals and substances used in the workplace have some level of hazard, including washing soap. Use of drugs and alcohol on site. So construction sites are dangerous places. Again, pardon me, remember we said this in Module 1, that construction sites are very dangerous places, or are dangerous places. So everyone involved in the work, whether directly or as a visitor, need to be fully alert of hazards, both to themselves and to others. So what we're going to look at on the next slide is going to be the substances that are hazardous to health. Now this would be looking at workbook page 30. So let's just look. What are the substances that are hazardous to health? Um, Almost all chemical substances carry some health risk, and these basically include diesel and petrol, paint, paints, thinners, adhesives, mastics, or cement. The minimum health risks that do arise from chemicals are respiratory problems, breathing problems, lung damage, which are caused by inhaling fumes. Also, some kind of mental fogginess, that's dizziness. You feel a bit dizzy as though you're drunk. Other things include skin disease such as dermatitis, that's the most common form actually, allergies to certain substances, burns, even poisoning. So usually that would be caused by swallowing toxic chemicals. There are laws that govern the use of substances in the workplace, and I think you remember in the first slide we talked about COSH, okay, and that is basically the Control of Substances Hazardous to Health regulation. And we're just going to go over the main requirements for that. So it does require that you establish what the health hazards are when it comes to substances. You carry out a risk assessment for use and storage of these substances, provide safety equipment and control measures, provide information and training for employees, provide health monitoring where necessary, and plan for emergencies. Now, just to add, some more to this, COSH is more than a simple sort of all-rounder document. It is a very large and complex set of regulations, and you have each of the regulations designed for a particular type of situation. But the main points are laid out, in slide 3, and it basically, in this slide, and they can be summed up as risk assessment. So what are the particular risks for a substance and how can these be reduced? Information. So everything that you need to know about the substance to ensure that it's safe, ensure that you use it safely. And this also covers, training where necessary, but certainly the information given with the substance talks about protection. So what protection do you need? What types of PPE? Does the area need to be cleared of people before you use the substance? Does it have to stay empty for a certain amount of time afterwards? And I think this has to do, like, sometimes when you paint you paint an environment or you paint a room, for example, you know, they do, depending on the type of paint used, you're asked to people to stay away because of paint fumes, because that can cause some sort of mental fogginess. Okay. Now, before we get into this next slide, I do want to talk a bit more about the substances that are hazardous to health in a construction environment. So, some of the substances, and this is sort of going back to Kosh, some of the substances that are commonly found on the site and that are hazardous to health include acids, and they can cause burns, adhesives, you know, the fumes from those are not very nice for one. Plaster, asbestos can actually cause lung diseases. Cement, concrete, or alkali, they cause burns. Thinners, they're toxic. They can cause irritation to your skin. They actually can be explosive as well. Diesel, and they sort of can cause skin diseases, and you know, sort of things, harm to the environment as well. Now, other things also include gases. Gases can be toxic and you know, explosive as well. Hydraulic fluid, those can cause skin diseases or harm to the environment. Insulating material, they can actually cause lung diseases or skin irritation to your skin. Lead, as you know, those can cause poisoning and also bad for the environment. Mortar additives, they also, you know, can cause various things. You have oils, paints, petrol. I mean, these are just some of the substances that you can find on a construction site that are hazardous. Okay, so do take a note of this. And common risks to health include things like exposure to asbestos, exposure to silica, even exposure to excessive noise can actually cause problems to your health. Exposure to excessive vibration and handling. So, for example, using a jackhammer for a long time can actually cause problems to your health. Okay. Now, the general hazards um, and risks also continued. Um, involve things like you know, inadequate clothing. So if you don't, you know, have or you know, wear the correct clothing on site, they can actually cause skin injuries. It could be that you've left a part of your skin exposed, whereby you know, I don't know, welding, sparks, and the rest of them can actually catch on to you, which is definitely not a good thing. Okay. Um, some things for me to add here is exposure to silica. Okay, that comes from you know, sort of concrete dust. This will contain varying amounts of silica, and you need to sort of properly protect yourself by wearing a face mask. Okay, so it's absolutely important that you do take care of yourself on a construction site, and you do adhere to any COSH safety um, that's that is on the site basically. Now, just going here, some of the general hazards again, and health hazards and risks. We're talking about inadequate clothing, so that could, you know, skin injuries, chemical spills, welding sparks, ill health due to weather conditions. So those are some of the things that can happen if one isn't wearing adequate clothing. So if you were sort of wearing shorts on a construction site, I can understand that it gets hot while you're working, but wearing shorts in the winter on a construction site can actually cause ill health to one because of the weather. It's not the best weather to be wearing shorts in, is it really? So things like that, skin injuries. You know, if you're not wearing the right PPE, the right gloves, the right shoes, you know, that's inadequate clothing. If there was a chemical spill, you could get burned, you could get welding sparks, things like that basically. Noise. Noise can actually cause permanent and temporary loss of hearing. Okay. Um, Vibration. Remember, we talked about using a jackhammer excessively without any brakes or following the safety rules, okay, that can cause white finger, and definitely that's not good. Dust. Dust can cause respiratory problems or skin disease. Moving plants, you can actually get crush injuries if you don't follow proper health and safety rules or do your risk assessment. So remember, I think it was in the first or the second slide where we were talking about, it was the first module where we were talking about a particular worker who was trying to control traffic near a jackhammer, and because he didn't do his risk assessment or health and safety assessment, he was basically crushed by the moving vehicle. So be careful, do your risk assessment and your checks when you're moving plant. Because again, next thing, there are broken bones and internal injuries. Asbestos. Asbestos can cause lung diseases. Now, just giving again some more information on this particular slide. There's some of the hazards again on the construction site, like we've mentioned. We said inadequate clothing, which puts you, the operative, at work because skin injuries such as chemical spills and splashes can arise from both using and carrying chemicals. For example, bags of cement. If you're not wearing adequate clothing and then you have this spill, that can actually cause a burn. Overalls do provide good protection because they cover most of the body and they can be worn over clothing. So for some tasks also, disposable overalls need to be worn. These are worn ones and then you throw them away. Okay, so do consider that. Also, welding sparks. So this is giving some more information to this bit about inadequate clothing here. Welding sparks. So cotton overalls should be worn when welding because some synthetic materials will melt into the skin and cause burns. So do be careful about wearing the right clothing when performing tasks on a construction site. The other thing is also ill health due to weather conditions. So, like I mentioned, construction sites are exposed to the weather, so it's important to dress accordingly. Don't wear shorts in the winter because you're excessively hot, because you will make yourself ill. Noise, hearing loss. Constant exposure to loud noise will actually impair your hearing, and it can cause you illness. It's called I think it's called tinnitus. Please forgive my pronunciation. But that's basically where you have constant ringing sounds in your ears. That is not a good thing, okay? Because that means that you've been constantly exposed to loud noise. And then, we mentioned here about vibration, where you get the white finger, and that's basically where there's been damage to the blood vessels of the hand. So circulation is restricted, and it basically turns the skin white and reduces the sensation in your fingers. Okay, so do take care. Again, we talked about dust. So any dust is harmful. If you keep inhaling dust, it's harmful. Okay, and so it can become trapped in your lungs, and some form of dust actually do have toxic things in them. Such as dust from cement that can cause burns, and asbestos. Okay, and that is a fatal disease. So it's always good to wear a mask to reduce the risk to your health. Now, we did talk about skin disease. Now, one of the most common forms of skin disease is dermatitis, and cement dust is one of the commonest forms of dust on a construction site, and this can burn the skin. So do take note of that. Now, we did mention something about moving plant, just giving some more information. Plant is the word used to describe machinery on a construction site. So, for example, dumper trucks, cement mixers, road rollers. While not in a defined road system, a construction site can carry a lot of traffic. So you don't have to be on the main roads. Construction sites do carry a lot of traffic. For example, um, sort of around here, because we're within the university, there's a lot of construction happening here, and I've seen lots of traffic. There are cranes, there are trucks, diggers, you name it. It's quite a lot of traffic, so it doesn't have to be on the main road. So safety awareness is needed. Accidents involving plants can result in crush injuries, broken bones, internal injuries, again, like we've mentioned here. Now, asbestos. There are a number of diseases caused by exposure to asbestos, and we're going to be going through them in more detail over the next few slides. Drugs and alcohol on a site can lead to accidents. I mean, drinking and driving, or driving under the influence of drugs, is illegal because they're dangerous. Drugs and alcohol impair our judgments and basically cause slow reactions. So can you imagine that on a construction site with lots of plant, machinery, equipment? I mean, I don't mean to sound a bit dramatic, but can you imagine sort of being drunk and operating machinery and basically sewing off your hands or something, or a hand? It's just, don't be drunk on a construction site. Okay. Now, there are no specific regulations concerning the use of alcohol and drugs in the workplace. However, the HSE, again, which is the Health and Safety Executive, make it clear that it is dangerous, and the employers can develop their own policies on this matter. And obviously, from what I know, employers have a zero tolerance to alcohol and drugs in the workplace, let alone even on a construction site, because it is very, very dangerous. Now, general health and safety regulations do require employees to be responsible for the safety of themselves and others. So, trying to work while under the influence of alcohol or drugs will be against these regulations, because imagine it, if you're under the influence of drugs or alcohol on a construction site, you could do something that could seriously harm someone or cause a fatality. Okay, so do think about this, and I think there's some examples, or something you work through on page 32 in the workbook. There's an activity for you to prepare, and then you can talk. If you're working in a group, you can talk to one another about this. But let's go through this slide. So, when working on a construction site, you need to be alert, you need to be able to function, able to think straight, and aware of the safety of others. And of course, you can't do this if you're under the influence of drugs or alcohol. Working while under the influence of drugs or alcohol can cause loss of balance, traffic and machinery accidents, like I've just talked about now. So that can happen if you're driving or operating plant. Loss of concentration, because it does impair your judgment as well, and just generally not good. And it can cause a form of unconsciousness while working, causing injuries both to yourself and to others. So do not consume or come to site under the influence of drugs and alcohol. Now, remember we talked about substances on a construction site. I'm going to talk about the storage. So, only store the minimum you need. Store in designated, well-ventilated areas. These should be away from the immediate work area, separate from other substances, because can you just imagine all these substances mixing together? That's just going to go kablam, not very good. Also, in specially designed storage cabinets, accessible only to those authorized to use the products, and away from all emergency escape routes. So, just again, some more information here. Only store the minimum amount of chemicals and flammable substances that you need. Don't increase the risk by keeping huge stocks of substances on site, particularly if there is an incident. The more hazardous substances there are, the bigger the problem will be. I'll just give you an example, because it's not just only in a construction site. A while ago, actually, I went to B and Q. And I was looking for, I had some blocked drains, and I was looking for, I think it's called sulfuric acid, which you can use to unblock the drains. And what they said, is when it runs out on the shelf, they don't keep any in the warehouse because of, health and safety. So if there was a fire, there would be an explosion because of all these chemicals. So they don't store anything in the warehouse chemical wise. Everything was always out on the shop floor. And again, just some more information on storing in designated, well ventilated areas. Um, Storing away from the immediate work area, this reduces the risk of contamination, particularly from a leak, also from injury caused by a fire or an explosion. You need to store it separate from other substances, so some chemicals will react badly if mixed and, go kablam. And this can even cause an explosive atmosphere. Also, storing in specially designed storage cabinet means that you make sure the correct type of storage cabinet is used for each chemical. For example, gas bottles must be stored in a cage outside so that any blast from an explosion is dissipated into the air. Okay, and also making sure that it's only accessible to those authorized to use the products. So some substances require specialized handling. For example, gas bottles used for welding and cutting. So if handled incorrectly, the valves could be damaged, allowing highly flammable gas to leak out into the air. And that's really bad because obviously it causes breathing problems, lung problems, so not good for yourself and for others. And again, for the final one, some more information. Um, Keeping it or storing it away from all emergency escape routes. So, you do know, or you should know, that escape routes must be kept clear of all obstacles. There can't be anything, because if there was a fire, you can't have people tripping over stuff trying to get, sort of through the escape route. So they must be clear, and the presence of toxic or flammable substances will heighten the risk of injury. So if there's an emergency, also the substances could be the cause of the emergency. Okay. Now, next thing we're going to talk about some hygiene, which is washing your hands. Washing your hands is a basic method for It's a basic method for staying healthy. Washing your hands before eating or before leaving work helps prevent general sickness, particularly after using the toilet. Bacteria can enter the body through your mouth and cause stomach and gut problems. Washing your hand helps prevent Wales disease, and this can be caused by contact with the urine from cattle, pigs, dogs, and rats. And the symptoms can range from flu-like shivers and high temperatures to internal bleeding and organ failure. Okay, so you can see that hand washing is very, very important. If you think that animal urine might be present in your work area, you need to wear gloves to protect your hands. Okay. Contamination from soil. So there are bacteria that live in the soil. The worst is tetanus, which should be vaccinated against. Chemicals being absorbed through the skin or through your skin. Okay, so again, we did talk about this in the previous slide. When you're handling these materials, either the person is specialized, you need to wear the right protective clothing, and also, wash your hands after, okay, just to basically limit or stop the absorption. Also, burning from alkaline products. Again, if you use materials incorrectly, um, you know, you do need to wash your hands because basically, depending on what it is anyway, acids obviously just burn straight away. But washing your hands in some cases will be able to prevent burning from alkaline products. So hand washing, absolutely important. The next thing, which is slide 9, we're going to talk about asbestos. Okay, now asbestos is extremely hazardous to health. Now, asbestos may be present in older buildings. Its use were actually banned in the UK in 1999, and it was mainly used for fireproofing. There are some places actually where asbestos may still be present, and that includes lagging on pipes, walls, ceilings, walls and roofs of garden sheds and garages. Okay, so there might be some asbestos in these areas. But just to go through this slide on what asbestos is, it's a building material. It's fireproof and used to construct roofs, firewalls, flame-proof cladding, and it is available in three types. Chrysotile, what's this one? Chrysodolite and amosite. Okay, now I'm just going to read a bit of a case study. A large research laboratory was built in the 1960s. The services were run between floors and accessible via rows of large but easily removable tiles, set in rows at regular intervals across the width of each floor. The tiles were constructed as a sandwich, so a sandwich thin metal base. You had middle fireproof layer, then a thin layer of wood veneer, and then carpet. The fireproof layer turned out to be asbestos. Because the edges of the tiles were exposed, the asbestos layer was also exposed, and each time a tile was lifted or replaced, asbestos dust was released into the atmosphere. To replace all the tiles would have been um, basically very expensive. So, in conjunction with the safety officer, it was decided that the asbestos should be painted with a specialized sealant paint each time a tile was lifted. So, anyone working on tiles would be required to wear disposable overalls and a full face mask. Because, again, we did mention that asbestos can cause lung disease. Okay. Also fitted, these face masks were fitted with an air supply. So, they weren't meant to be breathing these things in, because asbestos is extremely hazardous to health. Also, laboratory staff had to be cleared from the area until the work was complete. The building has since been completely renovated and all the tiles removed. So, just to think among yourself when you're having a discussion, guys. Um, do you think that this was an adequate precaution? And if not, in your opinion, and could you write this, on a piece of paper and put in your workbooks, what should have been done? Okay. And if you need a copy of this case study, I can make that available to you. The health hazards associated with asbestos are mesothelioma. It's a cancer of the lining of the lungs. Lung cancer. It's tumor growing in your lungs. Asbestosis, which is scarring of the lungs. And pleural thickening, and that's thickening of the wall between the lungs and the rib cage. Now, these diseases are extremely serious and often fatal. So, they're all respiratory diseases that do affect the lungs. So, you have to be absolutely careful if you are working on a site that, you has been identified to have asbestos. Now, if you discover asbestos in a building, you should stop work straight away, report it to your supervisor. A warning sign needs to be put up. You need to create an asbestos management plan, and this is actually, you're going to be asked in your workbook to create an asbestos management plan. Now, could you, as a group or individually, if you're doing this on your own, research an asbestos management plan, just a simple one, and draw it on a piece of paper and include this as part of your homework. And you also need to call in a HSE licensed contractor to deal with the problem. So, just some more information here. Never attempt to work with asbestos yourself if you're not licensed or trained to do so. Do not work in an area where asbestos has been found or you know it's present. If you discover asbestos, do not ignore it or fail to report it, because again, if you ignore it, you're causing harm to yourself and to other people. An asbestos management plan basically details the following. So it looks at who's responsible for managing asbestos. So a contact is needed, someone who takes responsibility for dealing with the problem. The asbestos register you have just made. So a list or report on the location, use and type of the asbestos you found. This can basically be a table or diagram, and plans for work on asbestos material. So what work is to be carried out, whether the asbestos is going to be removed or sealed up. Okay, and also should contain the schedule for monitoring the condition of the asbestos. So if the asbestos cannot be removed, then a plan is needed to monitor any damage that comes to the asbestos. And you know, also your plan needs to include how you need to tell people about your decision. So the type of labels and notices that will be used. As you can see on the screen here, there is a danger sign that says asbestos, um, cancer and lung disease hazard, and only authorized personnel are allowed, in that particular area. Okay, so you do have to have labels and notices, and it's a way of communicating to people that there is asbestos in that area. Now, we're going to talk a bit about PPE worn for handling hazardous material. So it's better not to handle hazardous material at all, or to leave it to a specialist. And if there's no other way of carrying out the job, then you need to think about PPE. And these include protective gloves. They will protect the skin of your hands. Respirator. This guards against respiratory problems. This can range from a simple paper filter mask designed to protect you from basic dust inhalation to a full face type with its own air supply. And this comes, if you're handling asbestos, maybe in a closed area, okay, to avoid lung disease, which is used where there are toxic gases in the atmosphere, and maybe handling asbestos as well. Also, goggles or full face protection, they protect your eyes and your face from splashes and burns. Overalls, we talked about them, they're designed to protect from the substances you're handling. So disposable overalls are available for highly toxic substances. Remember, we did mention that with the person dealing with asbestos. Also, if you were welding, it's good to wear overalls, because they do protect from the sparks that would, arise from welding, basically. Right. So this is the end of Module 4. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me. Thank you so much for watching.